Judge Harris, a serious-looking man, tapped his gavel lightly. "The court is open." Attorney Megan Ross stood and, in a firm voice, declared, "Your Honor, before any arguments are made, my plaintiff Claire's defense has new evidence that completely alters the course of this trial." A quiet murmur spread through the room. Claire's husband, Daniel, straightened in his chair, his smile faltering for a second. Claire kept her gaze fixed on him, thinking, he thinks he's going to get everything, but he has no idea what he's about to hear. Before we continue, if you're rooting for Claire and want to see Daniel lose that confident smile, subscribe to the channel, like it, and comment where you're watching from. I want to know where this story is going. Before all that courtroom tension, Claire and Daniel were the picture of what many would call the perfect couple. They lived in a beautiful suburb outside Chicago, in a white-sided house with an impeccable garden. The photos in the living room showed trips to Florida, their children's birthday parties, and dinners with friends. To their neighbors, Claire and Daniel were an example of partnership and success. But behind the smiles, the relationship had been fraying for years. Claire remembered well how everything began to change. Daniel, who used to come home punctually for dinner, started working late almost every day. He always had an excuse: important meetings, urgent projects, last-minute business trips. At first, Claire believed him. She tried to be understanding, kept everything in order, and made every effort to make weekends enjoyable for the family. But the emotional distance grew. She began to notice small signs. Daniel's phone always face down, deleted messages, sudden mood swings. One night, while Daniel was taking a shower, his cell phone vibrated on the nightstand. Claire hesitated for a few seconds before picking it up. It was a short message, but it made her heart race. "I miss yesterday. I can't stop thinking about you." Claire felt a chill run down her spine. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. She confronted Daniel that very night. "Who is it?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Daniel laughed uncomfortably. "You're being paranoid, Claire. She's just a co-worker." But the following weeks only confirmed Claire's fears. She hired a private investigator, something she never imagined doing. A few days later, she received photos that left her speechless. Daniel in a restaurant with a blonde woman, hands intertwined, laughing as if they were on a romantic date. Claire kept the evidence to herself. She didn't want an immediate scandal. She didn't want to destroy the image of stability she still had for her children. But inside, something had broken irreversibly. Now, sitting in the courtroom next to attorney Megan Ross, Claire remembered every detail of that discovery process. All that pain had transformed into determination. She wasn't there just to defend herself. She was there to reveal the truth Daniel had tried so hard to hide. The day of the hearing arrived faster than Claire expected. The Chicago sky was gray that morning, as if reflecting the weight she carried on her chest. Claire dressed calmly, choosing a dark blue suit that exuded determination. Her hair was pinned up impeccably, and her expression was that of someone who knew there was no turning back. On the way to court, Claire barely said a word. Megan Ross, her attorney, mentally reviewed every point of her defense. "Remember, Claire," Megan said calmly, "no matter what Daniel says today, we have solid proof. Trust me." When they arrived at the courthouse, Claire felt her heart race. The room was bustling, lawyers coming and going, papers piled high on the tables. When she finally saw Daniel, it was like being punched in the gut. He was impeccably dressed, smiling with an almost provocative confidence. And to Claire's shock, he wasn't alone. Beside him, sitting with an air of superiority, was Olivia, the woman she instantly recognized from the investigator's photos. Claire took a deep breath to maintain control. Olivia looked directly at her and, for a moment, gave a mocking smile, as if to show she was already part of this story. Megan sensed the tension and whispered, "Don't react now. Let them think they're in control." Judge Martin entered the courtroom, and everyone stood. The room fell into absolute silence. Claire felt the pressure of all eyes on her. The judge began the session by asking each side to present their case. Daniel's lawyer was the first to speak. He described Daniel as a devoted father, victim of a controlling and cold wife, trying to justify why he deserved not only the couple's assets, but also primary custody of the children. Claire listened silently, each word like a stab wound. When it was Megan's turn to speak, she stood with impeccable posture. "Your Honor, today we will show that the story told by the other side is far from the truth." The mood changed. Claire watched Megan's every move and felt a glimmer of hope. The lawyer began presenting financial documents, records of suspicious spending, and a timeline showing Daniel's absence from family life. Daniel, who had maintained a confident smile until then, began to grow restless. But Claire knew the climax was yet to come. She had saved her strongest card for the right moment, and that moment was drawing near. The tension in the courtroom was growing by the minute. Judge Martin motioned for Megan to continue with her evidence. Claire clasped her hands in her lap, feeling a cold sweat trickle down the back of her neck. Megan walked to the center of the courtroom, keeping her gaze firmly fixed on the judge. "Your Honor, so far we've been talking about numbers and absences," she said, her voice calm but charged with intent. "But there's something even more serious that needs to be exposed." Daniel crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair as if bored. Olivia, beside him, looked confident, almost relaxed. But when Megan opened a black folder and removed a thick envelope, the air felt thin. "We have brought lawfully obtained documents and photographs that demonstrate a pattern of behavior inconsistent with what the other party described," Megan continued, handing copies to the judge. The judge flipped through the pages with a serious expression. The first photos showed Daniel and Olivia checking into a downtown hotel together on different dates, always late at night. There were receipts for expensive dinners, records of bar transactions, and even proof of a trip to Miami taken just by the two of them. "That's irrelevant," Daniel's lawyer stood up, trying to interrupt. "We're here to discuss the dissolution of the marriage, not to judge moral issues." Judge Martin raised his hand for silence. "Sit down, counselor. This evidence may be relevant to the decision on asset sharing and custody." It was then that Megan revealed the final piece. An exchange of messages between Daniel and Olivia. The messages made it clear that Daniel had been embezzling money from a joint account to fund his lover's luxurious lifestyle. Claire watched every reaction. Daniel blushed, his smile completely disappearing. Olivia, who had maintained an air of superiority until then, began to look around, visibly uncomfortable. "Mr. Daniel," said the judge in a serious tone, "do you have anything to say about the misappropriation of these amounts?" Daniel tried to speak but stuttered. I just wanted to—" "Your Honor," Megan interrupted, "we would also like to present the private investigator's report, which confirms the father's absence from important events in his children's lives." The following photos showed birthday parties Daniel wasn't at, school meetings Claire attended alone, and even a day Daniel lied about being on a business trip, but was photographed at a resort with Olivia. The room fell completely silent. Olivia stood up suddenly, tears in her eyes. "I'm not going to stand here and be humiliated," she said, before quickly leaving through the side door. Daniel tried to hold her back, but she pulled her arm away and walked away. Everyone present watched in astonishment. Claire, for a moment, felt the weight lift from her shoulders. Judge Martin paused, adjusted his glasses and declared, "Considering the evidence presented, this court will have to re-evaluate the requests for custody and division of assets. The evidence demonstrates bad faith on Mr. Daniel's part, which will be taken into account in the ruling." The impact was immediate. Daniel lowered his head, unsure how to react. Megan sat down next to Claire and whispered, We turned the game around. Claire felt her eyes fill with tears, but this time they were tears of relief. The courtroom was completely silent. Claire sat, taking a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. Daniel stood motionless, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the floor, clearly shaken by what had just happened. Olivia's hasty exit still echoed in everyone's ears. Megan Ross, sitting next to Claire, stood firm, but let out a faint smile of confidence. Judge Martin looked up from his notes and around the room. His voice was firm, filled with authority. After reviewing all the evidence, testimony and documents presented, this court concludes that Mr. Daniel acted in bad faith, including the misappropriation of marital assets for the benefit of third parties and the partial abandonment of parental responsibilities. Daniel's lawyer opened his mouth, but the judge raised his hand to interrupt. "Order in the room." The atmosphere was electric. Claire felt a mixture of tension and hope rise within her. The judge continued, "The assets will be divided equitably. Furthermore, Mr. Daniel must fully repay the amounts embezzled from Ms. Claire, as well as contribute to the children's child support, medical expenses and school expenses." Daniel swallowed hard, trying to breathe, but he couldn't make a sound. Claire closed her eyes for a moment, feeling justice finally prevail. Megan Ross placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "You did it, Claire." The lawyer stood and headed for the exit, gathering documents. Claire followed, each step feeling lighter than the last. She knew the journey there had been painful, but she also knew that this moment symbolized the strength and determination she had developed over the past few months. As they walked down the courthouse hallway, Daniel remained seated, immersed in his frustration. Claire walked past him without a backward glance, feeling free for the first time since the divorce began. Megan Ross smiled again. "This is just the beginning of a fairer life for you and your children." Claire took a deep breath, feeling the weight she carried slowly lift. Outside, the sun was beginning to break through the grey clouds, illuminating the courthouse courtyard. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly smile. As she left, the children ran to her, hugging her tightly. "Mother!" they shouted in unison. "We're together now," Claire said, hugging them back. She knew the verdict not only restored her rights, but also restored the family's trust and stability. As they walked away from the courthouse, Claire looked up at the sky and thought, never underestimate the power of truth and determination. She was finally ready to begin the next chapter of her life. After court, Claire returned home with a sense of lightness she hadn't felt in years. The children ran to her as soon as she walked through the door, their small arms wrapped tightly around her. For the first time, Claire realized that the fear and anguish she had carried for so long were finally giving way to something different: hope. She sat in the living room, watching her children play with the toys scattered across the floor. The house, which had once seemed filled with painful memories, now had a renewed glow. Every corner seemed to hold the promise of better days, of a routine rebuilt with love and truth. Megan Ross called her later that day to discuss final details of the divorce and finances. "Claire, everything is in order. You now have the resources you always deserved. Use them for yourself and your children. This isn't just about legal justice, it's about starting over," Megan said. Claire felt a wave of gratitude. She knew that nothing that had happened could erase the pain of years of betrayal, but she had learned something fundamental. Her strength lay in continuing, in fighting for herself and her children, even when it seemed impossible. In the days that followed, Claire reorganized the house, re-established the children's routine, and gradually rediscovered the small pleasures she had neglected. She started attending a yoga class, visiting friends she hadn't seen in months, and even set up coffee dates with colleagues from her previous job, rediscovering a lost version of herself. Meanwhile, Daniel, isolated and ashamed, tried to reorganize his life, but he no longer had control over the narrative he once dominated. Claire, on the other hand, felt she could finally write her own path. One afternoon, sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun set, Claire reflected on everything that had happened. Every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of distrust had prepared her for this new chapter. She smiled at her children, who were playing in the yard, and said almost aloud, "We'll be fine." And in that moment, there was no resentment, only clarity. The court's justice had been an important step, but the real victory was the freedom, confidence, and hope Claire felt within. The future was still full of challenges, but Claire was ready to face them with courage. For the first time in a long time, she believed she could rebuild her entire life, fully, honestly, and happily. Months had passed since the court handed down its verdict. Claire watched her children grow up in an environment filled with love and security, far from the tensions that had characterized the past few years. Their every smile was a vivid reminder that justice achieved in court wasn't just about money or possessions. It was about dignity, respect, and the rebuilding of a family. She had reconnected with friends, resumed old hobbies, and even started a small personal project she'd always wanted. Writing her memoirs, not to relive the pain, but to turn her story into inspiration for other women facing similar situations. When Claire entered her home, she felt a lightness she never imagined possible. Every room, every wall held memories of overcoming and perseverance. And as the days passed, she realized it wasn't just about recovering what was lost, but about building something new and true. Even Daniel, isolated and aware of the consequences of his choices, had become nothing more than a shadow of his past, powerless to influence Claire's life or that of her children. The courtroom had been merely the stage for a legal battle, but the true victory was personal, silent, and lasting. One afternoon, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee in her hands, Claire looked out at the horizon and reflected, "Never underestimate the strength that exists within you. Life may seem unfair, but it is precisely in the most difficult moments that we discover our ability to resist and start over." She smiled, gazing at the sunset. Her children played in the yard, laughing and running, and Claire felt the peace she had long sought. Every tear shed, every sleepless night, and every challenge she faced had led her here. Not just to victory in court, but to a full life full of possibilities. The past, with all its pain, remained as a lesson, the present as proof of resilience, and the future a promise of days filled with hope, strength, and freedom. Claire knew that, whatever came, she was ready to write her own story, with courage and determination. "This is just the beginning," she thought, her heart light and her eyes shining with emotion. Claire's narrative ended there, but her life continued, stronger, more aware and freer than it had ever been.